Hello. Today we'll be discussing AP Environmental Science Unit 2, Biodiversity. At the end of this unit and at the end of this video, you'll be able to sufficiently discuss what is biodiversity and the different types of biodiversity and how humans impact biodiversity in different organisms. So, first up, we got types of biodiversity, and the first of which is genetic diversity. And genetic diversity is basically the physical genes of a species, and we're talking about a specific species. So, for example, let's go with a poison dart frog. It's about different types of poison dart frogs, and using our dart frog analysis in comparison to this next diversity, species diversity. And species diversity is different species of different biotic factors. These will be visible. So we're talking about poison dart frogs here in relation to frogs. Frogs are the different biotic factors, and the different species in this case is the poison dart frog. Then we got the habitat diversity. It's different habitats among species of animals. So it's the frogs living in a habitat. And that is habitat diversity. So, can you name another example like the example of the poison dart frog used? Alright. Now we need to learn about natural selection. So, natural selection is the theory that the species of the animal that adapts to its environment the best because of its genetic adversity will move on, while members of the same species that have a bad genetic diversity will die off. Genetic diversity is how a species adapts and evolves. For example, the beetles in this picture will be brown in the future because it fits their niche the best. So we see right here in the first stage that there's 3 brown beetles, 3 green beetles, and 3 blue beetles. And the environment is brown. Then we see an overproduction of beetles right here. And right here, we see the selection, and this is what we're talking about. So, the green and blue beetles are being able to be seen easier by the birds, and the brown beetles blend in with the environment. So, the brown beetles are able to reproduce more and are able to fit their niche the best. So, this is natural selection. Next up, we're going to be talking about ecosystem services, which is an integral part of this unit. So, there are 4 different types of ecosystem services. The first we're going to be talking about is provisional services. This is things directly provided to us by nature. This is just like food, water, basic resources. Followed up is supporting resources, and those are processes done by ecosystems that support a valuable human action. This is pollination, agriculture. Next up is regulating services, and this is ecosystems stabilize climate or conditions. So, for example, this tree is absorbing CO2, and as an effect, it produces O2 that humans then consume and digest, and then we breathe out the CO2 that these trees then reduce. This also helps reduce the carbon in our atmosphere. So if we cut down more trees, then there will be more carbon in the atmosphere. Finally, we got cultural services. Cultural services are recreational or intellectual benefits that we gain from nature. So, if a scientist makes a report study of nature that leads to a valuable product being made, that is a cultural service. Next up is island biogeography. So, there are 2 rules that are essential to know about island biogeography. The first in which is that islands that are closer to the mainland have higher species richness. Let's take Madagascar, for example. Madagascar is pretty close to the mainland, so it has a higher species richness. Next up, larger island habitats support more species richness, which means Madagascar fits this because Madagascar is a very large island. Next up is ecological tolerance. And ecological tolerance is the range of conditions that an organism can tolerate before a serious damage or death occurs. Think about highways and how they how it affects noise pollution, and affects animals' ecological tolerance. Then we have the optimal range. An optimal range is the range of an environmental condition, such as soil pH, temperature, etc., where an organism can survive, grow, and reproduce. If an organism moves out of its optimal range, it undergoes psychological stress, which is stress that causes an organism to suffer with stunted growth or impaired reproduction. Note that some organisms have a bigger optimal range because of genetic diversity, which is another reason why this is a benefit of natural selection. Now, give an example in your notebook about what is optimal range and give an example of optimal range. All right. So, habitat fragmentation causes what we just discussed about ecological tolerance and optimal range. So, habitat fragmentation causes these noises and stuff to be inside the optimal range. And habitat fragmentation occurs when a natural habitat is split or destroyed by humans. Take this as an example. This road fragments this habitat into two. So the species is only on one side, and there's only blue flowers on this side, while there's only red flowers on this side, compared to it being really diverse right here. Now, habitat corridors connect paths of parts of fragmented habitats. So there might be like a little cross right here where they can cross between each sections. Now, we're going to be talking about the next topic, ecological succession. So there are two different types of ecological succession, and that is primary succession and secondary succession. Primary succession is new formed or uninhabited area colonized by a pioneer species. And a pioneer species is the first species of a community. So this is generally formed from bare rock. And it needs a keystone species in order for this to be primary succession, otherwise it will fail. And a keystone species is a species that determines community structure. Next up is secondary succession. And secondary succession is when an old habitat is disrupted and regrows itself. And generally, it needs an ecosystem engineer, which is like a beaver, to reorganize this habitat. And an ecosystem engineer is an organism that creates or destroys a habitat. So let's practice. In your notebook, write down these two questions. So, the first question is, identify one reason why a frog would be stressed that is living near a highway. The second one is, explain why humans should protect habitats rather than fragmenting them. I'll give you a couple seconds to answer that in your notebooks, and you may pause the video. Alright, so identify one reason why a frog would be stressed that is living near a habitat. Well, as we can recall, a frog can be stressed that is living near a highway because of noise pollution, because it's inside its optimal range. Secondly, we got explain why humans should protect habitats rather than fragmenting them. Well, we should do that because it can lead, as explained earlier, to reproduction rates declining, reproduction problems, and it can also result in organisms dying and other problems that happen within an organism when humans go inside its optimal range. And if you're able to obtain all this information, then good job, because that is the end of your Unit 2 review, and see you next time for Unit 3.